Well, hello and welcome to No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. Today we are going to look at tariffs of both the American and the Chinese variety, the impact of the industrial carbon tax. What about maple washing? Is it working? Should it be? And also new crimes, things like cyber attacks on stores. Honestly, the whole food sector seems to be a little bit under attack right now. So we're going to look at the impact of all of this on food prices and on food security with the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois. So you know him because he runs the operation, he's director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie. But you've also got a new gig down there in Texas. You're going to Texas A&M, to talk to them about their new agribusiness program.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Congratulations. That's quite an honor that you were asked to do that.
Well, thank you. And I'm not leaving Dalhousie.
No, I get,
when you get a phone call from Texas A&M to lead the number one program in the country, number three in the world, you have to kind of pay attention to that call. So absolutely. And I was just down there last week, and obviously during my meetings, a lot of things came up beyond just the scholarship.
What's going on in Canada? What's the state of the Canada-U.S. relationship?
I'm sure you'll appreciate, Senator, that when you're down there, the focus is mostly on Mexico, not necessarily on Canada.
Absolutely.
But everyone wanted to know what I thought about President Trump and what I thought about his policies. And frankly, I mean, I've always been a little ambivalent about what's been happening. There's lots of noise. I don't tend to pay attention to the noise. I look to action. I look at what actually is going on, how it's impacting businesses, and obviously uncertainty is impacting businesses. And we saw that with the Bank of Canada's decision today. Uncertainty was written all over that decision for sure. So I can appreciate that. But at the same time, we're in the business of feeding people, and we have to continue to feed people and do it the best way we can, and offer affordable food to as many people as possible. And Texas, which has, I'm sure you know, has a massive agri-food sector. I mean, the agri-food sector in Texas is basically 6 times the size of Canada's. so it's really.
I think Texas
really
is as big as Canada.
Sort of, but I do include cotton in there, and cotton is a big sector in Texas, obviously. But still, it's just. I mean, the university itself has 80,000 people. The 6th largest football stadium in the world. It has a private airport, 12 private airplanes. I mean, it's just a different level altogether. So I'm looking forward to be exposed to wonderful professional students. These students actually pay a tuition worth $250,000 US for 2 years.
Yes, so they care.
They care, and they want quality. I mean, so the pressure's on me, not on them.
Yeah,
I need to deliver, which I kind of like, actually.
No, it's good. And we all need those moments in our life to kind of reset and refresh and refocus, right? But
when I come back to Dal, of course, next year I'll be better and have a different perspective. Because I've always believed that the coverage about the Trump administration in Canada has always been very simplistic. America is a complicated place.
No, it is. And I was going to joke with you, but I almost dare not, which is, is there any sign? Because so many people actually kind of fell for the story during the campaign that he was at the border with troops coming to break us so he could own us, right?
I know. And
as you say, they don't really pay that much attention.
And I've been to New York State in the last 6 months, and there's a different tone there for sure. But frankly, I think it's important for people to understand that it's all about geopolitics, and it's about power and influence. It's not about taking over countries. It's not about invading countries. It's about power and politics, really.
And the focus, and this is why I'm going to lead off with this one, the focus in the U.S. and with all of this whole battle is recalibrating the global trading system and the power balance, and that means it's about China. And we're spending all of this time, important as it is, on tariffs coming from the US, but we're still sitting here with Chinese tariffs on canola and on lobster and a lot of things worth billions of dollars. I think it's a $2.5 billion at risk in the
That's right.
canola sector. This is, we've seen a 25% drop in prices for our farmers. Weigh it out for us. It doesn't seem we've got a lot of action on that yet.
Well, it makes our products less attractive. And China is a huge market, huge country. I was glad to hear from Prime Minister Carney that it is going to be a priority. Now, again, that's just noise. That's just noise. I'm looking for action. And frankly, I think the decision it's pretty easy to make, given what has pushed Canada to implement tariffs on Chinese EVs back in October. That's really why we're in this position. It's because of us. We're the instigators here.
We started the fight. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that people need to understand that at the end of the day, farmers and harvesters are paying a really huge price right now, and that needs to end as soon as possible. So let's hope that over the summer it will be a priority and something will be done.
So the Americans had asked Prime Minister Trudeau to slap the tariffs on Chinese EVs in order to help their own industry. So what are the chances of us lifting that when we're in this battle with the Americans and we're trying to placate them?
Well, I mean, first of all, we have a new tenant in the White House since then. And I think the EV agenda is a little different under President Trump.
And in Canada too, yeah.
Exactly. And so, and frankly, I do think that Prime Minister Carney is smart enough to understand that. So the North American dynamic around EVs has completely changed. And of course, there are a lot of companies supporting the strategy that are financially struggling now. So it's the EV strategy that we have in Canada is a house of cards. And I think every day we're getting signals that this house of cards is about to fall apart. And so are we willing to sacrifice our farmers and harvesters for a house of cards? I don't know.
This is, I'm going to divert here because I read this the other day on X. So it's a farmer talking about using EV, electric farm equipment. So he said he seeded 6,000 hectares, about 23 square miles for those of us who are still in the old age. He used 30,000 liters of diesel, but with an EV tractor or set of equipment, he would have had to stop 322 times to charge that equipment.
Oh my God.
It would have required 918 hours of charging, which would have been 3 times longer, the charging alone, than his total seeding operation. So it always raises the question for me.
Well, I do see an advantage, though. As soon as he finishes his seeding, he can start harvesting.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There'll be no time left.
No time to go back to the barn.
We have to really rethink this whole EV strategy.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some research that is required, but at the end of the day, we need to be realistic, and farmers can't afford to take risks. They just can't.
And not like that. Like it was sort of breathtaking to look at the numbers. But just to kind of wrap up the Chinese tariff issue, sometimes I don't think people understand. In this country, we sell $8 billion worth of grains and grain products to China. Like it's
Absolutely.
Huge.
And frankly, because of our situation in North America, and I think everyone agrees that our dependency is extremely unhealthy with the Americans, 70% of all of our agri-food exports go to one place, and that's the U.S. right now, 70%. Yeah. And that has grown since 2020 with the New Deal. And so I think everyone agrees, and I think I've been saying it for years now.
Yes, you've
been saying it for years. You need to diversify. And so, and China, instead of being judgmental towards their human rights and other issues that we may have with our partners or potential partners, we need to start doing business with them. And I would include India for sure, because we have tariffs. There are tariffs in India against our own products like lentils, for example.
Exactly.
So,
And that's a big issue in Saskatchewan as well with Murid
absolutely.
Al-Khatib and
Yep.
uh,
AGT.
okay, so let's talk about just the tariffs in general. We're going to do another podcast on the question of the steel tariffs, but we're still dealing with it. The prime minister supposedly in the middle of the campaign kind of pulled back on the retaliatory tariffs that we'd impose because that becomes a tax on us. And lots of people are calling for that again at this point. Just stepping back a bit, what have the tariffs been doing to the food sector and the food security sector?
Well, I would say there are two main vectors: the canned goods,
Right.
canned salmon, canned tuna. That's been problematic. Why? Because often these products are sold as loss leaders. Margins are incredibly thin,
Yeah.
like super thin. So an increase in the cost of whatever they're buying to can these things is a problem for sure. Now, retail wise, I don't think that consumers will see a difference. It's just up the food chain. You're actually making the sector
Right.
less competitive.
Right.
They're basically eating it, as someone in Washington said or a few weeks
Yeah.
ago with Walmart. They're eating those costs essentially, which makes them less competitive. And in some cases, they basically lose money
Right.
when they're producing the product. Now, the alcoholic sector, that's a bit different because margins are much higher. And
Yeah.
so I'm not suggesting that they're able to absorb anything, but there's more margin there to play with. And of course, with summertime and patios coming up, there's a lot more demand for draft beer. And draft
Yeah.
beer doesn't need aluminum at all. And
Yeah.
so
But
that's why.
all the drinks and stuff do. You see a lot of people drinking a margarita and a can, all
Yeah.
those things. So it is going to have that impact there in
At
terms
the end
of,
of the day, basically, it will hurt our sector's competitive because typically into June, July, breweries, restaurant don't like to play around with prices. Once they set
yeah.
prices for the big season, they don't play around with prices because it just irks people. People will
Yeah.
notice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I want your assessment too of the so-called maple washing because I know you also posted a few pictures of
Every day,
things.
Senator, I get emails with pictures, and some of them are crazy.
Navel oranges made in
Navel
Canada.
oranges.
Okay, no,
Who
we don't
knew?
do.
Who knew?
So what's going on there?
So this is really, I think, the number one story I got was this one gentleman in New Brunswick went into a Atlantic superstore,
Yeah.
took pictures of Canadian navel oranges, so $8 for 3 pounds. Obviously, he saw a problem, went to management, say, I think you have a problem.
Yeah.
And so they rectified the situation, but the same person, the same gentleman went back to the store 24 hours later, only to figure out that those oranges were from Egypt, but they
Right.
were 12.5% less expensive. Now that, Senator, is maple washing. You're basically raising the currency. You're raising prices just because of that maple leaf. And that
Yeah.
to me is not appropriate.
Well, and that's the problem. I mean, Canadians did in their passion about, trying to react to what was going on in the US say, "Oh, we're going
Yeah.
to go. My friends and family are doing it. They're going to the store and they're looking for Canadian product." But then if that's happening, A, it's outrageous, and
Yeah.
B, it just turns the whole thing into
Now
a
Loblaw
mockery.
did apologize.
Yeah, yeah,
They did tweet, and of course, they sent me an email asking for
yeah,
the gentleman's email, so that was fine.
yeah.
But the Buy Canadian, I'm not sure if you saw Nielsen's IQ's report on actual sales data. So
Okay, what's it
grocers,
say?
well, so the Buy Canadian movement was there, but it wasn't really significant. So sales for products of Canada, so 98% of products being Canadian, up 1.2% year to year in the last 3 months. So from February to April, during that big elbows up campaign,
Yeah.
1.2%. And for made in Canada products, so 51% of that product is Canadian, up about 2%. That's basically it. Now, products of America, made in the USA, down in volume 8.5%. So,
Okay, that raises that. So that means it's consumers are making choices. So what does it say that we don't have the product to offer them? Is that why the impact on the Canadian side is so much smaller than the impact on the American side?
so sort of, yeah. So emotions drove behavior, and clearly people hated America more than they actually wanted to buy Canadian. That's basically what it says. And of course, with grocers, they completely de-Americanized many sections of the grocery store, including produce. So they just went out. They went to Peru, Egypt,
Yeah.
Mexico, and so sales were way down. So if consumers wanted to send a message, they did to America, but it doesn't mean that all of that translated into more support for Canadian companies. So that was a bit of a disappointment.
Yeah. So will we see a little bit of bump on that, do you think, in the summer where you can get more local fresh produce? Like we've got a lot of winter.
Always, absolutely. Now
Yeah.
the challenge in the eastern part of the country, so Ontario, Quebec, and you are in Ottawa right now. You know
Yeah.
that the spring has been very cool
Right.
and wet, so
Yeah.
there's going to be a bit of a delay. So for fans of strawberries out there, corn, I mean Ontario corn, Quebec corn is just amazing.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to wait probably a few weeks more, but products are gonna be there for sure. It's just
Yeah.
there's gonna be a lag this year because of the weather.
But it also does speak to that issue. And again, I keep referencing the pandemic where we realized that we had shut down a lot of production in this country for a lot of things. We just got so used to buying it easily from the dollar store or Walmart or whatever it was
Yeah.
that we stopped doing a lot of that here. And so we don't have a lot of Canadian product. And the other thing is there's some funny rules around there. Like if it all comes from the US, but if we put it in a bag here or a can here, all of a sudden we can say packaged in Canada,
Or prepared in Canada.
or
Yeah.
prepared in Canada.
Yep.
But it's kind of
Well, I think a lot of people realize the last few weeks that there's a lot of, going back to the maple washing
Yeah.
argument, some brands are putting that maple leaf in the name of their
Yeah.
brand. I mean, Habitant soup is the worst case ever. Bought by Campbell's decades ago.
Yeah.
Manufactured in the US entirely, but there is a maple leaf on that can saying created in Canada.
French pea soup.
French pea soup, of course. So that's
Okay.
maple washing a little bit.
Yeah. So people do have to be a little more sophisticated when
I
they're
think so. I
yeah,
think so.
looking at that. I want to come back, as I mentioned at the beginning, because again, of all of these supply chain issues, because it's not just about the product. So we saw the lifting of the consumer carbon tax, but the Prime Minister remains very committed to the industrial carbon tax. So that is going to impact the food chain, the packaging, the delivery, as probably as much, if not more, as the consumer carbon tax. How do you read that?
Yeah, so to me, that was the most important part of the carbon tax. I mean, I do feel for consumers, obviously.
Yeah.
But there were rebates for that. My concern has always been around competitiveness. And I do wonder whether or not we're doing a disservice to our agri-food industry, keeping that tax in place. Because companies in the US don't have to deal with that. And so I've always said in Parliament, at Senate, I'm not against a carbon policy of some sort in Canada, as long as our policy is in lockstep with the Americans. I think we need to work together on this one for climate change. If we go at it on our own to save the world with
Right.
only 2% of the world economy,
Yeah.
we're going to hurt our sector first and foremost. So we need to be. I think we need to be extremely careful with how we move forward with any sort of carbon policy. And now, again, I think we need to do something. I think Canadians expect us to do something. But for now, I would focus more on the carrot approach than the stick approach. So incentivizing farmers to become greener and not just tax them. I just think it's dangerous.
Well, that's in the first place, most people think the industrial carbon tax applies to oil and gas and the big polluters. They're not thinking about farmers, right? I mean, that's how it's
That's
being
right.
cast in people's minds, that they're the bad
And
guys.
processors and
Right.
truckers and I mean all these elements of the supply chain are being taxed right now, and it's basically, I mean, when you look at food inflation in Canada, 3.8%, okay, the highest food inflation rate within the G7,
Yeah.
with the exception of Japan right now. In the US, with Trump happy tariff, with tariffs all over the place, their food inflation is dropping. Why? So ours is increasing, theirs is dropping because their agri-food sector is more competitive. They
Yeah.
can absorb geopolitical shocks. We cannot. And I don't think that the industrial carbon tax is helping.
Right.
If anything, it's actually making things worse.
And then the emissions cap too, which again impacts the ag sector directly. So let's talk about what you're seeing from the new government. Um, is there some change in structure? I know in the Trudeau era, a lot of the agricultural, the agri-food business was kind of in the industry portfolio or looked at
Yep.
through that lens. Is that now being shifted to agriculture? Should it? What's the best way to deal with this? Because it kind of seems not to have its own home, and it's so big, the agri-food sector. This is not just, farmers and whether we've got enough rain here. This is a major industry in this country feeding the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always looked at the pecking order in Ottawa, and
Yeah.
to give some clout to the portfolio. I mean, let's face it, Agri-Food Canada is the epicenter of legislative policy in that sector, to be honest, and it's now led by someone who's never been in cabinet and who's barely known around the country from PEI, and so. So I think we all agree that this was a regional appointment,
Yeah.
much more so than about the portfolio itself. The good news is that Cody Blois, who chaired the Ag Committee for many years, who's done his homework, he was the Ag Minister going into the election.
In the
was
interregnum period there,
That's
yeah.
right. He was just appointed a parliamentary secretary to the PMO, which is going to be helpful. So he understands ag very well. I've actually spoken to MP Blois many times, and
Okay.
he's from Nova Scotia, and he knows, he understands the sector. He actually has voted against his own party several times, including on the carbon tax, by the way.
Yeah.
So he's gutsy, and he understands the game, he understands the players. So that's reassuring. Now, other than that, am I reassured by what's happening? It's a wait and see scenario
Yeah.
for me. I'm giving the government the benefit of the doubt. They are promising to give more attention to processing, which actually was the only party who did that during the election. So hopefully they'll deliver on that. I wish we could see a budget in the spring.
Yes.
That would have been helpful, but we're going to have
Yeah.
to wait a while before we know exactly where the money is going to be spent. That's my disappointment so far.
And I guess there's some obvious questions. I mean no disrespect to PEI, but honestly, it's the size of a couple of farms in Saskatchewan, and
Yeah.
getting people to understand that this is big business. It's not just, Farmer Joe with a piece of straw between his teeth, right? This is
Exactly. What I'm hearing, and I actually had meetings yesterday with some folks in Halifax that do lobby the government in Ottawa on a regular basis. And
Yeah.
what I'm hearing is that we're dealing with an ag minister who understands the current pecking order, understands that he still has a lot to learn. But the discourse coming out of his mouth so far, it's all Farmgate. I mean, it's just all Farmgate. And frankly, if we are to escalate, if you are to bring up the value of that portfolio, we need to think about the entire value chain from Farmgate to plate, including the consumer. Because right now, if we're talking about consumers, people will go to Health Canada, they'll go to innovation, and that's what happened under the Trudeau regime, right? Most of the important files related to ag and food went to other ministers other than ag.
Yeah, so it doesn't have that. I mean, we kind of need an agri-food, an agribusiness sector. It's as big as energy. There's different valuations, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
But I would say, if you are to create the Ministry of Food, for example, and I've always advocated for that, you would probably include some element of health. Now AI, I would say, energy, to your point, transportation, which is under Christopher Freeland now.
Right.
To be honest, is making some people nervous a little bit, but I mean, it is. I mean, transportation is a big file for ag.
It's pretty key. Yeah.
You're in Saskatchewan, you know this.
Yeah. And then that gets us back to, I guess, if we're going to see any real action on taking down interprovincial trade barriers, because that too is an issue when it comes to shipping things and buying each other's product.
The one thing I would say about interprovincial trade barriers, which I'm not hearing right now, it's great. I mean, I'm enjoying the leadership that's coming from premiers, because I think the heavy lifting will come from premiers.
Will come from them.
Ottawa will just be pushing for it verbally, but really the heavy lifting has to come from Houston in Nova Scotia, Ford in Ontario, Smith in Alberta, Moe in Saskatchewan. So we're seeing agreements, but where's supply management?
Yeah. That was my next question, because I think the Prime Minister has been clear is that he is not putting dairy quotas on the table. It isn't up for grabs. Now, that may be his negotiation stance too, facing Trump, but there's actually not a history of that in terms of the Liberal Party and whether or not they would change their spots on that issue.
I recently had the pleasure to meet many dairy farmers.
Yes.
And some of them you probably know. I won't name them because they were all private meetings. But I would say a lot of dairy farmers outside of central Canada are incredibly nervous, and they see value in creating a roadmap to a stronger, more competitive dairy sector in Canada. And the one way to do it, if you were to do one thing, just one thing, to make the dairy sector more stronger in Canada, harmonize the allocation of quotas nationally, and eliminate dairy boards provincially. That's all you need. Going back to the barriers, if you want to really truly eliminate barriers in the agri sector, eliminate dairy boards provincially, and you're going to see a much stronger, much more competitive dairy sector across the country. But here's the thing, and Quebec knows this. Once you do that, naturally, money will flow and go towards efficiencies. And that's where you'll find that in Saskatchewan. You'll find that in Alberta. You'll find that in BC. So you'll see a huge shift from east to west, and Quebec knows that.
Yeah. And people fought for years about the wheat board, and it took forever to deal with that.
I actually was part of that fight when I was in Saskatchewan. Yeah,
exactly. And in the end, what we saw is farmers, being the business people that they are, is we'll sell our product if you'll just let us.
Yep. But the thing about the wheat board, what's different? First of all, it was a monopsony, not supply management. There weren't any quotas.
Right. True enough.
And that's the big one. That's a huge asset. It's their biggest asset. As dairy farmers, that's a big one. Two, farmers got smarter over decades. I mean, a lot of them have PhDs. They understand
Oh, yeah.
markets. They were able to actually make more money for themselves than the wheat board in Winnipeg. And they knew that in
Exactly.
Winnipeg, traders weren't competent.
Yeah.
In supply management, I would challenge you, Senator, to find just one dairy farmer who's not happy with the quota system. I
Yeah.
mean, which is worth millions of dollars.
Yes, because it works for them.
They'll be concerned about, how authoritative the boards are. They'll be concerned about certain things, but at the end of the day, it's made them a lot of money.
Yeah. No, I think I've told you the story before, but a friend of mine who was leaving government and the prime minister of the day offered an appointment, and the person said, I'll take a dairy quota, thanks. It'll be
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, we have a sector who has convinced politicians that they're losing money whenever we ratify a trade agreement, which is
Yeah.
nonsense.
Yeah.
Losses are hypothetical. They don't exist, but yet we're giving $1.2 billion to dairy farmers as a result of ratifying the United States-Mexico-Canadian deal. Now that is power.
Yeah, for sure. So that's where we're headed next on that topic, which is, of course, the negotiations are already beginning on that, and we'll have to see how that melds with the tariff issue. Want to ask about another story that you have been writing about, which is, and it's again, I mean, we're just seeing all of this protest movement on our university campuses, on our streets, the anti-Semitic, well, riots. I don't know what else to call them. So we've
Yeah,
got,
protests. Yeah.
yeah, protests, quote unquote. Uh, they're also disrupting the food chain here in this country, going to the big food suppliers,
The
the
Ontario Food
warehouses.
Terminal.
Yeah, those kinds of things. And then you've also been talking about the cyber attacks on distribution centers as well, which you can do from a phone anywhere. How concerned are you about this?
I think you know what? I actually was presenting at a cyber system conference in
Yeah,
Ottawa a few weeks ago, and I was the only foodie in the room. I was
yeah,
actually asked to talk about what's going on in the agri-food sector, and basically I kind of and people in the room were all expert in that space. They understand the risks, and I basically told them, listen, I've been in this sector for 25 years. I don't think I ever saw one presentation about cybersecurity in the
right.
agri-food sector ever. So
Yeah,
I don't think it's a priority, to be honest. And frankly, with the agri-food sector, it can go in many different ways. Of course, we're hearing a lot about ransoms and money and financial commitments and things like that, which is probably what happened to Sobase, for example, or even
yep,
Maple Leaf Foods.
yep,
But now we're hearing farmers being targeted by these criminals, asking them to stop. For example, if a group is against animal farming.
right.
So they went after an Ontario-based pork producer, asking him to stop doing what he's doing and apologize publicly. That was the ransom. So we're talking about money, but we're also talking
Yeah,
about values, conflicting values related to the food supply chain, which makes things very complicated. So motivations vary quite a bit when it comes to food. And because margins are so thin, a $25 million ransom, for example, is a lot of money for any company, even for grocers. And so
never
right
mind an
now,
individual producer, an individual
that's right.
farm. Yeah.
So I do think that the agri-food sector in Canada is highly vulnerable to cyber attacks still today. Yeah.
And I don't want to, create paranoia, but it is literally such an exposed sector. I mean, the crops are sitting out there, the animals are sitting out there. You walk into a store, the food is sitting out there. We really have to kind of get a handle on this.
I would say so. And of course, each and every organizations are looking into it, but there's no collective discussion about cybersecurity. It reminds me of about 20 years ago or 25 years ago when traceability came up. If you remember, traceability, people saw, oh, let's trace and track products and make it a competitive advantage. It's not about building competitive advantage. It's about securing and making food more safe or safer for consumers. And if there is a recall, you can actually make sure you protect the public as quickly as possible. And it's still a work in progress 25 years later. Cybersecurity deserves a collective discussion. It's not just about one company doing the best. It's about connecting, it's about interoperability.
Right.
Working together to basically bring down all of the threats that we can see.
One of the things that troubles me, and then I'll leave it here, it's just kind of off the top of my head, but we're seeing the Americans kind of return to a more, practical way of dealing with this. If people want to eat meat, let them eat meat. If they want to eat vegetables, let them eat vegetables, but not mandating this kind of stuff. I don't see the same kind of I'm just going to say common sense approach to that here. We still seem to want to manage that and manage that through government and or guilt a little bit more on this side of the border.
Well, if the last time we spoke, I think we talked about the so-called Vegan Act. That was under the Trudeau era, very anti-animal production. I don't sense it's the same thing now.
Yeah.
I hope I'm right.
I hope you're right too.
But I think food diversity is critical in Canada.
Yeah.
And to your point, food is no longer, if it ever was, it is no longer a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
It's about choice. It's about variety. It's about innovation. Let's work on that.
Yeah. Sylvain, thank you as always.
My pleasure.
Always the insights on this. Sylvain Charlebois, who's the director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University, and now he's a big deal at Texas A&M, running their master's program there in agriculture. And it is, again, congratulations. It's a feather in your cap that they have come all the way up here to find you. We knew you were here. We'll share you. We will share you. That's great. Good luck. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sylvain. And thanks to all of you for joining us today for this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. We'll see you soon.